Welcome to Bandit's Keep. I'm Daniel. Today I want to talk about what makes a system complete, or my thoughts on it anyways. I had been listening to several podcasts that I listen to regularly. A Diegetic Advancement by Riley, Merc the Meek's podcast by Merc the Meek, and also Decahedron podcast with Joe. And in all of those, they kind of were touching on this idea. I think it originally kind of sparked from Riley, but this idea of what makes a system complete. That is what's necessary to kind of play the game. And it really got me thinking because, of course, different opinions of what we need, what we don't need. And it's sometimes hard to think, since I've been playing now for a while again, and of course played when I was younger, what am I just adding? What am I filling in myself, rules-wise, when I pick up a system that is incomplete, let's say, and what am I not? Like, what's really needed? What's in a system? What's bloat? So I'm just going to give my opinions here. I would love to hear in the comments below what you think about what is needed, we'll say, in a system to make it complete. And that's what we're going to say. We're not talking about crunch or whatever, just what makes it complete. So I'm going to break this down into a couple different sections, I think, and kind of give my thoughts on it. And I'll kind of interject some of the things that my interpretation. So hopefully I'm not getting anybody wrong of the various podcasters as well, kind of what they were thinking or parts of what they were thinking and my thoughts on that and all that goodness here. So let's get to it. So mechanics is kind of an interesting one because I think most people would agree. And in my video a few weeks back where I said, does system matter? One of the big things was mechanics matter to people. And yeah, of course, if you're going to have a game, right, it needs to be complete. You need to have some kind of mechanic. What you need the mechanic for, though, and how it's used is kind of an interesting thing. Do we need, let's say the mechanic is I roll a die versus you, and whoever gets the highest roll wins. If it's a tie, then it's a tie, or you roll again or something. Let's say we do that for everything. You want to do a stealth check, that's what you do. You want to fight, that's what you do. You want to make a magic potion, that's what you do. You want to cast a spell, that's what you do. Well, that's a mechanic, and it's complete, and some people would love a system like that. But I think a lot of people might say, well, with that mechanic, you don't have the depth that they'd like in the game. It doesn't really describe a game. It doesn't make the game complete. How do we know the difference between different levels of wizards? Aren't wizards, they're all exactly the same. All fighters are exactly the same. Everybody has the same chance to climb. And with this, we need to start adding things to it. So I think for me, in order for a game system to be complete mechanics-wise, it can't just have a simple single mechanic, which I know most games do these days, unless it has lots of modifiers and lots of independent use cases. That is, the basic thing is you roll a d20, beat a number, but there's all these things that factor in. The number is adjusted by armor that people are wearing. The number is adjusted by your number. Your roll is adjusted by your ability or skills or the weapons you're using, right? So this is modifications to your core rule. You can also have different rules for different kinds of things, right? Like in old school D&D, you've got like thieves skills, which use a percentage check. You have turn undead by clerics, which is a 2d6 roll. Then you have your attack roll if you use the alternate combat system, which is a d20, right? So these are different systems for different things that you need to do. And you can do it either way. Either way would be complete in my mind, as long as you have a variety of mechanics or a variety of ways the mechanic can be used or adjusted to fit different types of characters to add depth to the story. And I should kind of interject here and say, I'm thinking of this in the long term. I think if you're sitting down to play a one-shot, you could have the most basic system ever, and that would be fine. Like literally just roll off against each other if it's a fight and you're done. But I think if you want long-term playability, the system needs to have a mechanic that's got some flavor up and down and can be adjusted based on player actions, player skills, and things in the world. Let's talk about setting. So I'm one of these people that does not love to play in established settings, as I say. I don't play in Greyhawk. I don't play in the known world of Mysteria. I don't play in the Forgotten Realms. I generally create my own world. But I think that games do imply a setting automatically. If you're playing a class level game, the classes will imply a setting, right? If your classes are, spaceship pilot and smuggler, right, and Jedi, Can I say that without getting sued? And then you know the setting. If your classes are, magic user, fighter, and cleric, you kind of know your setting there, right? So basically, the classes determine that, and so would skills, right? If you're playing a skill-based system and your skills are things like computer hacking, that's much different than a system with skills are, let's say, blacksmithing, right? Not that in today's world there's not people that blacksmith, but that's probably not a common skill for somebody in a modern skill-based system, right? So the setting is implied based on skills, classes, and also available gear, how the intended play loop, right? What are you doing in the game? If you're if you're playing a modern game, you're probably not doing the D&D thing where you're going into places and taking loot from people unless you're playing bad guys, right? That's the implication isn't that you're exploring, tunnels, murdering people and taking their stuff. That wouldn't fly so much, let's say here where I live in New York. But, in a D&D fantasy world, that's what you're doing. So the play loop implies a setting. And on top of that, I think I already said this, gear does, right? If you look at the gear list and you have 357 Magnum versus a laser pistol versus a sword, again, it implies some kind of a setting. So we do need, I think, for a system to be complete, some kind of a setting. And it can be like this. I don't think you need, in fact, for me, I don't want a full-blown setting, and I definitely don't generally want a setting to be baked in fully, a fully realized setting to be baked into my system. Sometimes it can be fun, but generally speaking, those are the kind of games I probably won't play forever. Like I can play OD&D forever or BX because there's a setting that's implied, but it's not baked in. If I'm playing Coriolis, which I really love, it's in their setting. So I'm not going to play that all the time unless I just love that setting, or I'm not going to play Star Wars forever or Aliens, right? Because those are very specific settings that give me less, in my mind, freedom to do what I want to do, which is create. Well, I made a video about the D&D I like. So I think some kind of setting information is important in a game. I'll pop in here to say that Joe at Decahedron talks about the idea that he doesn't want a setting at all. And I think, though, and again, I'm hopefully not misinterpreting what he was saying. I think what he means is a setting like the Imperium in Traveler or Coriolis's Third Reach. I forget what it's called now. Third Age, something, or something like that. He wants to create his own setting, but I don't think that he's saying he doesn't want swords versus laser guns in the game to determine. Maybe that is what he's saying. So let me know, Joe, if you watch this. Anyways, I think that I'm there. I don't necessarily want a full-blown setting, but I definitely want some implication of a setting in my system. Well, if you're not new to this channel, then you know that I like procedures in my game. I think that it's important that players and the person running the game, the referee, the dungeon master, whatever, have an idea of what the game should be. What is the loop, as they call it, of the game? What is the play loop? This can be really specifically written out like it is in, let's say, OD&D or BX, where it's very much, here's what you do at the beginning of a turn. You roll for this, you move, you do this, you check that. Wandering monster, morale, check off food. And you can work your way through it, whether you're in the dungeon or in the wilderness. And I think those kind of procedures work exceptionally well when you're trying to learn a new system, because it's kind of giving you this gameplay loop that you can just keep moving. You don't know what to do. You're kind of standing there and you don't know what to do next. Look at the next thing on the list of what's supposed to happen and you just move forward, right? And this basically gives us a tool that we can use. Now, I don't know that they need to be written out like that. I think a well-defined game that gives you an idea, and we'll talk about advice next, maybe as part of this, is enough. I don't think we need to have a procedure, boom, 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 in the game, but I do think that it's important to let the people that are playing the game, the people who took the game from you, if you're not standing there running it for them, right? You wrote this game. When they pick it up, if they've never played any role-playing game before or anything like this, they should know what to do. There should be a process. So maybe process, at least procedure, ideally, but process is strong. This is where the advice kind of comes in. I think that a system that has really strong advice on how to run the game will cover this. So if you give the referee really strong advice, they will hopefully be able to take that advice and guide the game. However, I think that having strong procedures helps the players, because the players understand what they're supposed to do. If you look at the process in, let's say, BX, which is why I think it's probably the best system to learn, those procedures are in the part the players should be reading. It's not in the Dungeon Master section. Players understand this is the steps we take each turn. And because of that, players understand what they're supposed to do. If all of that is walled behind a GM section, then it really relies on the GM to be able to keep the ball rolling, which can work and does work, I mean, with a lot of systems that don't have the procedures. But I do think procedures are useful if your game is targeted at people that are new and that you're trying to teach them the process of playing this particular kind of game. Here we'll touch a little bit. I kind of want to mention something. I was going to, like I say, I'm mixing advice in with procedures, but I'm going to mention something that Merc the Meek mentions on their podcast, which is, and I can't remember now, it was in an interview or something, but the creator of Mothership talks about the idea that, or maybe it was a tweet, that they don't have stealth mechanics in their game because stealth is super important to the game and they don't want that to be kind of put behind a roll, right? They want you to play that out. And this is a really interesting way to think about things. And I don't necessarily disagree. And when you look at things like what people say, well, D&D is a game about combat, especially like old school D&D or whatever, and because all the rules are about combat, this is kind of the counterpoint to that. Well, no, the rules are about that because combat's not as important and we can just roll for that. What's important is exploration, role play, and for that, you want to actually do it. The problem is, how does the GM know how to do it, right? And one of the questions that Mark kind of poses is, are they supposed to just know the genre really well? And I think when you create a game like this, that is the answer. The answer is that, yeah, you're supposed to just know. You're supposed to know because you're running, right, Aliens or Mothership or whatever. You're supposed to know enough. You've read enough. You've watched enough cosmic horror or space horror or whatever they are. And you understand how to set a scene, and you understand that when the players do certain things that you can kind of guide them in a way to get them to feel the tension and to act stealthy. And by allowing them to act stealthy, they can succeed. Because there's no roll, that's how you do it. But what happens when you don't understand this and it's not spelled out or you don't have the background? Now we get the thing that happened early on in D&D, which is, we know this because people talk about it, there was no rules for picking locks, right? There was no thief in original Dungeons & Dragons. And basically, there's really no locked doors at all in the little brown books. They're just stuck doors, right? The doors need to be forced open. Now, you could interpret that, and I do, as some of them are locked. That's why they're stuck, and you force them open by using an open doors roll. But other people look at that, and a lot of other people look at that and go, well, no, but what if there's actually a lock on it? You can't just roll an open doors check. Well, what do we do? Yep, I know what you said. Roll under your decks. That's exactly what so many people did. Now, my argument here is going to be that if your game system doesn't have the rules for the stuff that's important in it, and you expect the players to just figure it out, if they can't just kind of suss it out, what they're going to do is result to creating a role to do the thing. So you can't stop people from just rolling the dice by just not having a mechanic. So I think that, going all those back to mechanics again, I think that you need to have procedures and advice that allow the players to understand what the process is to do the stuff they want to do. And once you have that, that'll all move smoothly and you don't have to worry about they're just going to roll a die, because if your process says players describe how stealthy they are and referee decides if that works, then you're done, right? You don't have to have a roll for it because the rules say you don't have to roll. So I'd really love to know what you think about that, because I think it's a really interesting topic. And again, I'm not sure really where that should sit. I think for me, I'm on board with that, right? I've played long enough. We very often don't roll dice at all at my table because the players describe what they do. And I think about the world. I think about the way their skill level, where they're at, what the enemies are. And I will just, make a judgment call. And because I believe anyways, I am fair. They don't throw things at me. It works out. I don't always let them succeed. I don't always have them fail. And if it's really dicey and I'm not sure, I then have them roll for it. And what do they roll? Well, we make that up based on the situation and based on the other mechanics in the game. We look at it and say, this is how the game handles similar situations. This is what we'll do. So a game master that has the proper advice to understand how the system should work, we'll be able to take the more basic mechanic and add to it as needed, meaning you don't need to have a rule for everything. Funny enough, or maybe not funny enough, and I think I've said this before, you could read the 2 examples of play in the basic book of BX and know how to play Dungeons & Dragons. I've made that statement before. If somebody really wants to know how to play, they could read that, like, I think it's a total maybe 3.5 pages, and get a really good grasp. They're not going to understand every mechanic, but they'll get like how it works. And including the back and forth with Dungeon Master, things that you roll for, things that you don't. And it's baked into this example, a well-written example of people playing the game. And I think a lot of systems these days, I feel like an old man there, aren't putting that in there, right? They probably didn't put it in back in the day either, but they just don't, right? Because they think, well, you know how to play. You've watched people play on YouTube, or you know, it's in the zeitgeist. Everybody knows what role-playing games are. But if you put a sample of play into your game, you're doing a couple of things. You're clearing up some of the mechanics that might be unclear. You're also letting the reader of the game understand what your intent was, what you think as the creator of the gameplay loop, the game feeling is like. Now, they can, of course, ignore that and not play it in the way that you think, but at least by articulating that, they have a baseline to start from. It's that idea that you learn the rules, right, so you can break them, right? I've probably mentioned this before on this channel. I'm a photographer by trade, and when we're learning photography, we follow the rules. When I'm teaching a new photographer, this is how you do it, this is how you do it. But if you look at my work, I often break the rules, but that's because I understand them well enough to know when breaking them is good. So learn the rules, see what the intention is, and then break them. And I think an example of play, multiple examples of play, are really key to this. You know, the funny thing is, a lot of times I'll see people do, especially for games that don't have them, I'll see people do like example playthroughs of games on YouTube here, and they'll just do combat. And they'll literally just move the figures in and roll dice and talk about the mechanics. But that's the part that's maybe doesn't need to be explained as much to somebody who has played before, and they'll skip over that. It's the little things. Explain in your game with a sample how the roguish character tricks the guard when there's no real rule for that. There's no trick guard skill, right? How do they do that? Write out a little example of how that plays out and what you might do. Ideally, even with a couple of things like, this is what they did, this is how you might handle it. You might roll the dice like this, you might do this, you might do that, right? How would I handle that, right? I might say, well, I'm just going to roll a reaction roll modified by charisma. That's simple enough, right? You might say roll under your charisma. You might do a charisma versus their loyalty, because OD&D has loyalty score. Did you know that? Check, right? So you could do all these different things. Nothing is really set in stone. And by giving the example of which one you would do as the creator of the game, you give the potential players and referees ideas of how they can do it. One final thing I want to say, because I think I kind of skipped over it a little bit, is that if you look at, like some people might say, a system that has, let's say, gear, like adventuring gear, but doesn't have the price of a cow or a farm or rations at a tavern, or if you want to have a ring smithed, or if you want to have a fur coat made, or have a troop of soldiers, tents for them. If you don't have all those prices, it's not complete because you need that. I don't fall into that category. I think that a selection of the most important things that people will likely use when they begin the game. I remember, I think it was the Alexandrian. I'm going to say it was. They had done I'm pretty sure it was a blog post, but maybe it was a video, where they went through the equipment list and of OD&D and talked a little bit about how if you look at this list and you go, oh, 10-foot pole, and you've never played D&D before, you have to think to yourself, in what world are 10-foot poles available for sale, and we're going into dungeons, and what would I use it for? And it's funny because this is played out true in my game. I have a younger player, and they saw the 10-foot pole and at first thought it was just funny. They're like, oh, 10-foot pole. And they bought it, and they use that thing all the time. And it's really funny to see them do it. And players who had played other games like Pathfinder and 5e, but then came into my game, never used the 10-foot pole. The person who didn't play the game before and just looked at the equipment list saw that and was inspired by it. What are these iron spikes? What's this 10-foot pole? The gear helps create the gameplay loop, but you don't need to list the price of every mug of ale at the tavern because that becomes burdensome to me. Now you're getting deeper into the setting, as in a very specific setting. I think that if you're running your game and you look at it, you should be able to, and this is why I don't think this is necessary for a complete game, you should be able to figure out at least roughly what some of these more basic things cost. And again, even a very simple rule like OD&D has, which is they have rations, right? Of course. But if you read the whole thing, you see that you pay 1% of your experience points per month in upkeep. What is that upkeep? That's the inn that you stay in. That's the ale that you're drinking, right? That's just the basic stuff. If anything extra is you trying to get people to do stuff for you, which means you can spend as much money as you want. And I think that, again, is complete because it's enough to let us know you don't need to worry about all those little things. But let me know, do you think it's important to have all these trade goods? How much a barrel of mead costs versus tar, or I don't know what you buy, lead shot. I'm not sure what people are buying in D&D, for trade. Or is that something that the individual group should create based on their own world and setting? Let me know what you think about that. I find that to be very interesting as well, because different people like different levels of things there. But that's kind of what makes a game complete to me. Now, I'll also say that I don't think every game needs to be complete. I think that there is a case for super slim games that are aimed at people that have played before and just want a few basic mechanics and some little flavor to be able to play. But I think if you're creating a game that's meant to be the game that people are going to come into the hobby with and play, you've got to make sure you have all the things in there they need. How they make characters, obviously, like I skipped over that because I think that's pretty obvious, but what's the gameplay loop? How do we level? How do we place treasure? How do we do those things? That's the stuff that's going to be super important to somebody new to the game. And also when you look and say, well, hold on, it's 1,000 experience points to level up, but monsters are only worth 5 experience points. Wow, that's really going to take forever. But then you look at the actual treasure charts and you go, oh, wow, okay, this monster that's 5 experience points should probably have 50 gold pieces. So really, they're worth 55 experience points in that sense, right? So I think that, all these things kind of come together. You need some charts and tables, but not too many. But what do you think? Anyways, check the description below. You'll find a link to my Discord if you just want to talk about it there. Sometimes these conversations go there that way, or just other things. There's also a link to my Patreon if you want to support the channel. And of course, I would love for you to comment below. I just love the conversations that happen down here about different people's ideas, how they play, their experiences. So please do comment. I love to read them. And even though sometimes I get really far behind on, I do try to read them all. So anyways, I'll talk to you soon.